Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the open beta for Battlefield 1, which is oddly enough the 14th game in the franchise, but that's beside the point. This was developed by DICE and published by EA, and it's going to get its full release on October 21st, but we got our early access open beta, effectively demo really, officially anyway on August 31st, but those of us who were part of the Battlefield Insider newsletter got early access on the 30th instead. And the entire thing that I was interested in with this is that it's one of the very, very few World War I games that have ever been released, or are going to be released, I should say. We have Verdun, and that was the most recent thing before Battlefield 1. And I did pick up Verdun. I will be doing a video on that eventually. But as far as Battlefield 1 goes, it's the first mainstream first-person shooter set in World War I. Well, at least off the top of my head anyway. But anyway, my big questions here were, A, is this a good Battlefield game? B, how does it treat World War I? Does it treat it with respect and authenticity? And C, how playable is it? Because DICE isn't exactly known for releasing games that are relatively playable on launch. Well, let's start with presentation and go from there, because that's where the problems actually started with this thing. Now, I should mention that it is a fully featured PC version. It has tons of resolution supports, it has tons of graphics options to mess around with, and what ends up happening is that you start messing around with those and you find, holy crap, this thing runs like complete garbage. Oh wait, it's because I'm running on resolution scale 100%, which is not actually 100%, it's actually about 5K, because for some baffling reason the game seems to think you're running at 5K no matter what your actual resolution is, so 42% is actually 1080p. I think I ran this thing at about 50% resolution scale, which I'm not exactly sure what the proper resolution for that would be. But when I put it down to that, or when I even put it on 42%, I was finally getting frame rates in the 90s to 120 range, so it actually does run fairly well as long as you adjust the resolution scale appropriately. Problem being that that shouldn't be an issue in the first place. Now, of course, when you do actually get into the game proper, you find that there are tons of graphics glitches all over the place, and that's to be expected. I mean, we go into these things knowing that an open beta is not going to be the full version, and the graphics glitches are one of the last things they work out because they're focused on more game-breaking problems. So I didn't really concern myself with those. What I did concern myself with was actually how the game looks, and it looks fairly comparable to Star Wars Battlefront 2015. It's that level of fidelity. The texture quality is generally pretty solid, modeling is all very well done, and most of the animations, at least in terms of third person, are perfectly fine. Where it starts to get a bit messy is in the first person weapon animations, where they just look kind of goofy sometimes. Like the sharpshooter variants of the sniper rifles, which are just the bolt action rifles in this game, where you have a monopod on them, and it has this massive base that you grip. So you're sitting there cupping this base of the monopod instead of actually, holding the rifle properly. And then, of course, there's this odd insistence on flicking away the stripper clips when you're reloading your rifles, where there's no real reason to do that, because usually the bolt will do that when you slam it home anyway. Or there's things like the M1911 reload animation being all gross motor function instead of actually making sense and just being like, okay, let's just hit the slide release. It actually reminds me a lot of Battlefield Hardline in that regard, and it's not really something that's game-breaking or anything like that, but it's a mild annoyance. Luckily, that's really the only major complaint I have about the visuals themselves. I mean, the game looks good in terms of its visual quality, it's just that there are a few mild annoyances here and there with it. And the same kind of goes with the sound design. Most of the sound is extremely well done, as expected of DICE at this point, where you got this really nice crack of rifle fire, the explosions are really nice and beefy, weapon sounds are generally fairly powerful, except when they're not really meant to sound powerful, like, for example, they're firing pistol caliber cartridges, although why the M1911 doesn't sound particularly powerful is kind of beyond me, because, let's face it, the 45 is actually a fairly powerful round, but I digress. They've generally done a very good job with that, and the battle chatter is all pretty well done also, but then there's the music, which is what I would describe as relatively generic considering what they were going for with it, which is just kind of orchestral music. And the problem with it is that unlike in, say, Star Wars Battlefront, where it makes more sense to just start blaring music all the time, in this, it really doesn't make much sense, and it's actually pretty annoying when it comes up because it's really loud. Now, of course, volume wouldn't be a problem were it not for the simple fact that there is no music volume slider or any volume slider beyond master volume, so you can't turn the music down. Why they seem to think this is acceptable is beyond me, considering that separate volume sliders are effectively a standard feature, and not including them means that you're basically just skimping on features. I mean, hell, even console games have that as a relatively standard feature, so if you're not including it with this, then there's really no excuse. But apart from that and a few slight issues, generally the presentation is very well done, and that's definitely as we expect of DICE at this point. But of course that raises the question of whether or not they put too much time and effort into the presentation and not enough into the actual game mechanics themselves. And the answer to that question is a resounding, yeah, they definitely did. Now let's be fair here, there is only one map and two modes in the beta, and those are Conquest and Rush on the Sinai Desert map, which is Ottomans versus Brits. It is a wide open map, and there is basically no room for infantry combat. It is a very vehicle heavy map. It also exposes the major problems with this. Now before I go any further, let me reiterate, this is beta. There are things that could definitely change, namely the bugs, which I am expecting they will iron out, because right now the progression system is 100% broken. It doesn't work. So you have to use a workaround for it, which is going through the Battlefield website in order to actually be able to get any of the unlocks, which is incredibly irritating. You'll be playing through matches and going up and up and up in rank, but none of your classes are ranking up, and that's just a supremely frustrating experience. Next, the actual gameplay itself can be broken at times. Sometimes you will spawn in without anything equipped, sometimes you will spawn in without certain items equipped. For example, I ended up spawning in without grenades for some baffling reason, even though they were in my equipment list. And I've seen numerous reports of people spawning without anything at all. It's just kind of a crapshoot as to whether or not it's gonna work. Now, granted it is beta, but the bugs like that being this far into the game's development are incredibly concerning. Is this just a really old build, or are these things that they still haven't ironed out to this day? Because if it's the latter, then there's something horribly wrong. There's also the occasional odd hitbox issue, but mostly they've resolved that by having the servers be 60 Hz this time around instead of the 30 Hz that was in Battlefield previously, so they've mostly ironed out the netcode problems that series has had. But they do still occasionally pop up here and there, mostly with regards to someone that's high ping playing against someone that's actually low ping, but that's pretty much to be expected. There's only so much lag compensation you can do after all. But quite frankly, bugs and glitches are the last of my concerns with this thing. You see, the real problems with this thing lie in its core gameplay mechanics and how unbelievably unbalanced and nonsensical they are. You see, World War I was a war fought with almost entirely bolt-action rifles. Not much else. And yet, here you are with 4 different classes, one of which is the sniper class that uses bolt-action and lever-action rifles, one of which is the support class, which uses machine guns, one of which is the medic class, which uses semi-automatic rifles, which I might remind you were all prototypes during that time period, and only really saw use late in the war, and weren't even very good. And then there's the assault class, which uses submachine guns and shotguns. And again, submachine guns didn't come in until the very late stages of the war. This means that you can pretty much just throw authenticity right out the window, and any sort of logic goes along with it. Semi-automatic rifles have a ridiculous amount of spread to them, where your shots will just go careening off in odd directions even though there's no real reason they would do that. Submachine guns and light machine guns both get more accurate the longer you hold the fire button down, because that makes sense, right? I mean, it's not like you would control a submachine gun or light machine gun by simply firing in short controlled bursts instead of, oh, I don't know, just spraying and praying like a madman. Which of course screams to me that this was really made more for a casual audience so that they could rake in even more dough than they normally do with the Battlefield games anyway. Because let's face it, you can easily tell the casual players apart from the people who've actually played Battlefield for quite a while. They're always the ones running around like headless chickens, never playing their role properly, never playing the objective, just going for KD ratios. And that sort of thing is pretty rampant in this game as well. I sit there trying to play the objectives, or at least trying to facilitate other people getting to the objectives, and here they are just running around trying to get kills, because they seem to think kills matter. Newsflash to people who've never played a Battlefield game before. The objective matters. Play the objective, and don't treat it like it's a frickin' team deathmatch. But even once you get past that mentality, there's not really all that much in this game that either makes sense or actually works well. The spawn system is just broken now because now it's actually faster to respawn than it is to get revived. This is because you can do one of two things once you've been taken down. One, you can hold down the spacebar and shorten the amount of time it takes to respawn, or you can press another button to request a revive. Only a medic will never be able to get to you in time because it's practically impossible to see people on the mini-map that are actually needing revives, and there's no real icon that's readily available when people do request revives so that you'll know that, hey, this person's down and needs to be revived. Now you may be thinking, well, why don't people request revives, because doesn't that take down the ticket count? No, it doesn't. Your ticket count only increases by holding points. Conquest is now a domination mode. It's not actually Conquest anymore. You no longer have spawn tickets. It's just a team score that gradually increases as you hold the various points on the map. And that means that unlike in the previous Battlefield games, there is no consequence for dying and respawning, so everybody's going to respawn rather than get revived. This means that the best you can really do as a medic is to throw medkits around or throw medical crates around to heal people in your general vicinity, but even then, it only accelerates the healing process, because you actually get auto-heal that after a while of being damaged, you'll actually just start to replenish all your health automatically. And it's surprisingly fast. And so that ultimately just makes the medic class completely pointless. There is no reason to play a medic over any of the other three classes. Why? All three of the other classes have better weapons. One of them has anti-tank capabilities, and those are a godsend in this game. And of course, if you're playing as the support, you can throw down ammo crates, and everybody's obviously gonna need that. But the auto heal is so quick, and the respawn is so quick, that there's really no point in trying to use any of the medical abilities that the medic has. That means that they're going to be stuck with basically just a semi-auto rifle, and all the other weapon types are just better than that. Although I use the term better lightly because SMGs are ridiculously overpowered due to the absolutely minimal amount of recoil, the very high accuracy, and the moderately high damage, making them extremely easy to use. LMGs are also pretty much the same way. They have a fairly low amount of recoil, they are very accurate over a long period of fire, and of course they do a decent amount of damage. But here's the problem, they're really only good at short and medium ranges, because once you get out further than those, your sights really aren't that useful at picking off longer range targets. That's where the sniper rifles come in, which are just the bolt action rifles that you're going to be running into in this game. And nearly all of them do enough damage to basically be a one-hit kill. And not even a one-hit kill if it's a headshot like in previous Battlefield games. Oh no, I mean body shot equals instant death. And considering the size of the map that's available in the beta and how open it is, it's pretty easy to see why scouts are pretty much the dominant class. Them and the assault class, which uses the SMGs and shotguns, although I basically have never seen anyone using shotguns except me, which I guess speaks volumes about how good the SMGs are. Now of course this means that while long-range shooting requires a bit more skill, since you do have the projectile drop to deal with, although there's really not much projectile drop in this thing, when you're in medium and close range, it's basically just whoever manages to hit the other guy first and keep the crosshair or iron sights on them at that particular time. Which means it's not really so much about skill as it's about luck. At least with longer range you can say, okay, yeah, they have some degree of skill in compensating for the shot. But when you're in the closer ranges, it's just spammy and chaotic. And that's just infantry versus infantry. When you throw vehicles and horses into the mix, things get even more chaotic. Horses really aren't all that useful. You do get a saber, and it is fairly satisfying to get a charging saber kill, but other than that you get a lever action rifle, and it's just the basic Winchester 1895 Russian model with no sights or anything on it. So that can be useful, but the thing is, it's actually incredibly easy to get picked off while you're on horseback, so generally speaking, people just kind of ride around the edges of the map and pick off stragglers when they're playing as cavalry. Which of course leaves the other land vehicles and the aircraft. Now the aircraft don't really control very well. They use keyboard and mouse controls, and it's pretty sluggish and awkward at times. I imagine it's a bit easier to deal with if you're using a gamepad. Obviously I would prefer to use a joystick, and I haven't tried it with a joystick, but I'm guessing that it probably wouldn't work if I tried to use my joystick with it. But unlike in, say, Battlefield 4, where if you were in a jet, you were basically exclusively fighting other jets and not really contributing to your team at all, in this they at least give you a few aircraft that are good for close ground support, so you can try to take out tanks and such with them, where the normal anti-tank weapons can take an entire team throwing them at the tank to actually be able to take it out. But the thing there is, well, good luck hitting anything, because they're really not that easy to use, and in fact it's incredibly easy to shoot the aircraft down in this thing, even with just the basic small arms. I guess that stands to reason considering they're basically made out of cloth and wood, but whatever. Meanwhile, there's only really two land vehicles that people use en masse, and those are the heavy tank and the land ship. Now, the land ship is basically just a heavily armored troop carrier with a bunch of machine guns on it, but the heavy tank actually has multiple cannons as well, which means that you can just blast the living crap out of everything in your way. I am not joking when I say I have seen people going 38 or higher and 0 in tanks, because tanks are just that ridiculously powerful in this game. That's not to say that they can't be taken down. They can be taken down. The problem is that you have to unlock the AT rocket gun, which is basically not much better than farting in their general direction when you're actually trying to take the tanks down, and you also get anti-tank grenades. Both of these are as the assault class. Now you have to unlock the anti-tank rifle, but you can actually get the anti-tank grenades right off the bat. They really don't do all that much damage. You basically have to get your entire team throwing grenades at the enemy tanks in order to be able to take them down. And that's a lot easier said than done, considering you have to get really close to the tanks to be able to do that, and they're all armed with lots of machine guns, which mow you down incredibly quickly. Now here's the problem. This actually makes absolute sense for World War I. When tanks showed up on the battlefields of World War I, everyone was like, holy crap, what is this thing? How do we deal with it? We don't have anything that can actually stand up to this except for artillery, basically. The problem is that from a gameplay standpoint, it is absolutely infuriating to be on the receiving end of a somewhat decent tank player, because they're just going to mow you down from a decent range where you can't get close enough to do anything to them. And I'm sure some of you are going to suggest the K bullets that the scout class gets, but they do maybe 4 or 5 damage per hit, and you only get about 5 of them per respawn. So at that point, you're basically damaging them about as much as harsh language. Now, you might get ridiculously lucky with the K bullets, or you might get ridiculously lucky with the AT grenades or whatever, and somehow manage to trigger one of the location-based damage options that are available on the tanks, but I've only done that once, and I've never seen anyone else actually do it. Nearly every single time I've ever seen a tank taken out, it's been because of one of 3 things. 1, an aircraft manages to get a lucky hit in. 2, it got in a fight with another tank and lost. Or 3, somebody managed to get an artillery piece and hit it a couple times with that before the tank actually could get close enough to be able to hit it reliably. The only times you ever really see a tank get taken out by actual anti-tank weapons from the assault class is when it is in close quarters and it's easy for everyone to just kind of gang up on it and throw these grenades at it constantly. And part of that is because a vehicle in this game can actually hunker down and repair itself. Sure, it can't move or shoot while it's being repaired, but that doesn't really matter, because if you manage to get far enough away that you're not really taking damage constantly, then you can very easily repair yourself and basically just go in guns blazing again and repeat the process until either you die or everyone else does. It's actually utterly baffling to me that they thought this was a good idea. Tanks were already stupidly powerful in previous Battlefield games. They didn't need to be even more ridiculously overpowered, especially when all of the AT weapons in this are effectively worthless. Now, they do try to balance it out in some degree by making the infantry guy you spawn as when you actually spawn as a tank actually incredibly weak, because all you get there is a C96 carbine and not much else than that. So if you ever do somehow have to leave your tank because it's being blasted to hell and you need to bail out, then, well, too bad, you're just kind of screwed. So I guess at least they did that, but that's not really much of a consolation. Now, in the interest of fairness, there are a few things I did kind of like about it. I like that they kinda sorta did something like the Battlefield Hardline weapon unlock system, where instead of having to just gradually level up to unlock everything, in this you actually just use your war bonds that you earn by playing, which, I mean, they're earned by only leveling up right now, but I imagine in the full game they'll probably award them to you, at least in small quantities, for doing things like completing challenges or whatever. But regardless, it's nice that you're able to do that instead of simply having to level up to unlock the various weapons and just blatantly having superior gear to what you start with just by having played longer. Although they didn't really do it optimally because they still have level-based unlocks in this. You still have to rank up with your classes in order to unlock those various weapons that you're trying to unlock, which basically means that instead of it being a full-fledged, hey, this was a good idea from Hardline, let's put it into Battlefield 1, they basically just said, hey, we're going to take this thing that Battlefield Hardline did, make it worse, and stick it into Battlefield 1. Of course, the way they could fix that is to simply remove the rank requirement from unlocking all the gear and make it purely about the war bonds that you earn. Same thing goes for all of the equipment that you can unlock. It's still locked behind ranks. You guys need to stop doing the rank-based unlocks. They are objectively a bad system. The rank-based unlocks would only work well if it was purely cosmetic. Obviously, that's not the case here, and again, I would not be surprised if they did that purely so they could sell unlock shortcut packs. And before you start going, oh, DW's just talking out of his ass, they did it with Battlefield 3 and 4. Why wouldn't they do it with Battlefield 1? Anyway, moving on, they did improve the netcode. It's the updated netcode from Battlefield 4 that they patched in, I think it was, a year and a half, 2 years after the game's release. But it's still an objective improvement over the god-awful netcode that was in all of the previous Frostbite Battlefield games, so there's that. It's nice that the interface is clean and easy to work with. It's nice that it's a World War I first-person shooter as opposed to yet another modern military shooter or something along those lines. And it's nice that they stuck the server browser and everything back into the game itself instead of requiring you to go to the Battlelog website. But here's the problem. Absolutely none of these positives are anywhere near enough to make up for any of the game's faults. The faults lie at the core gameplay. The core gameplay is a mess. And I firmly believe that this is going to be exactly like Star Wars Battlefront 2015, where the problems were painfully evident in the beta version, and they did not fix any of them by the time the game launched. I will not be remotely surprised if Battlefield 1 turns out the exact same way. If they take all of the feedback that we have to offer about why this thing does not work well as a Battlefield game or even as a first-person shooter in general, and just throw all that out the window because they don't really care about Battlefield fans. What they care about is those sweet, precious Call of Duty casual dollars. Because you really can't deny that ever since Battlefield 3, this series has gotten increasingly casualized and has appealed more and more to the Call of Duty crowd. And they're doing that at the expense of what made Battlefield a fairly compelling series to begin with. Not necessarily a good series, but definitely a compelling one at the very least. And it's pretty sad to see. Ultimately, I'm glad that I kept my expectations for Battlefield 1 about as low as dinosaur bones, because what I found was just a rather crappy first-person shooter that's trying to pass itself off as Battlefield and failing miserably at it. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if they improve any of the issues by the time the game launches, but as it stands, about the only thing I actually kinda sorta had fun doing in this thing was bayonet charges. And let me tell you, the level of satisfaction you get from doing that in Battlefield 1 is nowhere near the massive amount of satisfaction you get from doing it in Rising Storm. I will, of course, be taking a look at the full game later on down the line, but I probably won't get it on launch, because, of course, they'll have a bunch of launch bugs I'll need to sort out. And then, of course, there's the issue of it coming out around the same time as Titanfall 2, and then the next month there's going to be Dishonored 2, so yeah, I got other priorities, let's put it that way. At any rate, that's what I thought about the Battlefield 1 beta. It's not remotely impressive. If you want to try it out for yourself, it is available to everyone right now on Origin, and I believe Xbox One and PS4 as well. So you can just download it and try out the beta, see for yourself how it is. I don't know how it is on console, I'll just go off the PC version here. But at this point, I just can't recommend it. Thanks for watching.